I'd like to read you an excerpt from my novel, Wild as Women. Carlo was surprised to find himself keen to discover who the man was, what made him tick, who lived his life behind this particular version of the political mask. There were a host of questions he was tempted to ask. Hypothetical, of course. The last thing he wanted was to invite the language of evasion to trip off another politician's tongue as mint-fresh and plausible as ever. Sidestepping questions with conviction was a talent with which they were born, an art form, a means of lying that set the political virtuoso apart from the run-of-the-mill MP. Their ramblings were accepted as if they must be informed, intelligent, a largely unwarranted gesture of respect that flew in the face of logic, as if everything they had to say had to have merit, had to be relevant to people's everyday lives. The reason I read this excerpt is that if a seasoned politician, we'll say, for example, David Cameron, the Prime Minister, if he's faced with opposition or criticism of a policy he's pursuing, or indeed something he's said, then he will fall back on two basic ways of dealing with it. I mean, the first is, if he is dealing with let's suppose it's question time and he's dealing with the leader of the opposition, he will attempt to ridicule the individual. This is because the leader of the opposition presumably has a following that could command public attention. If he was dealing, or is dealing, with a member of Parliament or anybody else from the body of the House or the general public, he will do his best not to answer the question at all. In fact, he'll avoid it. Because to answer it gives credibility to the argument or the question or criticism that the individual is raising. Now, political correctness has gone mad in this country in recent times, so that they now go beyond these two simple methods of dealing with criticism. The new method is to suggest that everybody who has an opinion that differs from their own is in some way mentally unbalanced or a crank. And the method that's used is a smile to the person sitting next to you. In other words, you're attempting to devalue the person altogether by suggesting that they are in some way unbalanced and can't see a simple argument. The political establishment does this with people like Nigel Farage, for example, because he says what he's got to say. And saying what you've got to say is the best way to become, or to be labelled as a crank or a fanatic. So this is the method that's used, which means, of course, that people who have genuine arguments that ought to be pursued relative to government performance, as we're dealing with now, for example, runs the risk of being labelled, as I've said, unbalanced or some form of mental retard, if they're incapable of accepting the point of view put forward by the establishment. This being the case, it means that legitimate argument tends to be avoided, and statements which may or may not be backed by fact from our history or whatever, that are brought to the public attention, in fact aren't brought to public attention, because the individuals concerned, especially if they're mainstream politicians, live in fear of this ridicule and labels that will be attached to them that they can't shake off. I, of course, and people like me, are not concerned about this. We're in the position to say what we think, and will continue to say what we think. And we've been subjected today, to a visit from the American president, who's then made a bold statement about it's a good idea for us to stay Europe and so on and so forth. And this is being presented as if it in fact is a relevant or logical statement. Now I know, and you know, that it's far from that. These two men meeting today, I mean, anybody believes he came here to wish the Queen a happy birthday is living in cloud cuckoo land. He came here at the express instruction of his masters. And his masters are the same masters as David Cameron's. There exists in the world somewhere between, I've heard it said, 60 or 70 banks and global multinational companies who are doing or in process of controlling Europe, in other words, dictating to the commissioners what Europe's policy should be, and of course are in their pay. And these people meet every year to discuss what their next move shall be. And I've little doubt who they are. It's fairly clear if you look at the history, for example, of the Federal Reserve in America, etc. But these people are pursuing a policy of, because they know that the only way they can get their what they've set out to achieve is to control America and the United Kingdom. Now, and it's also true to say, although many people don't like to talk about it, again, because they may be labelled as cranks, that the war didn't end in 1945. And many people have stated this, people with first-hand knowledge of how this operates. The war didn't end. Even the process of denazification in Germany wasn't completed. And apart from going to America, of course, where they were invited by people who shall be nameless, they went to America, they went to South America, and of course it's reckoned by some people that about 6,000 came here to the United Kingdom. Now, since we observe, in the context of the debate about Europe, although there is no debate in reality, there is no argument in favour of our staying with Europe, only an argument that is being pursued by this cartel, as I've been talking about. There is no argument about it, there is no debate, there is no reason whatsoever why we should even think about staying inside the damn thing, and nor should we have done so for years. So the people who were in, I mean, doesn't it strike you as peculiar, doesn't it strike you as strange that we can go through Heath, Wilson, Roy Jenkins, David Cameron, Osborne, and numerous others who I can't think of at the moment, but yes, Ashdown is another good example. Kinnock, all failed politicians in generally speaking. Why are all these people spouting from the same page? I watched Ashdown the other night on Question Time. And I was absolutely amazed. The man has a vested interest in trying to achieve something in Europe for himself. He doesn't believe anything he's saying. And he's asking people to quote names of organisations of international repute who are in favour of Britain leaving. Well, he won't find any of them because they're part of the cartel to which I referred. In other words, we are being led up the garden path, or the attempts being made. Now, I listened to the BBC today, and I watched a couple of simpering BBC reporters, unfortunately women. You'd think that the arrival of Obama was like the second coming, as if in some way, shape or form they treated the man with a reverence that's quite ridiculous. And you ask yourself why. And again, it's part of the same argument. We're down once again to a cartel, a group, controlled by a few people, or this 60 or 70 people in the world, who want to take control. Now, are you going to label me a crank? Do you think I'm mad? Do you think there's no logic in that statement at all? Well, consider this. Just consider this. Why would British people and the American president believe that we, and they certainly wouldn't do it, should give up any thought of future prospects of the United Kingdom in the world in favour of committing ourselves to becoming a satellite of Germany? France have done it, which is very unfortunate because France has a cultural history and so on where it could quite easily stand on its own 2 feet were it not lumbered with this Euro thing. But once again, we're talking about political leaders who are under the control of third parties. So I sit and listen and I watch and I think, do they really believe that we will accept the fact that we give up the pound and go into a Eurozone, give up Great Britain in favour of becoming a satellite of Germany and Europe and this cartel, where our citizens no longer, or at least they have a vote because they'll make sure they retain that. That'll be the skill of the thing. That the British population will be able to vote, but the votes mean nothing, or will mean nothing. They mean very little now. And that we're quite happy to become, to have people coming and going in our country as they see fit, rather than as we see fit, that they seriously believe that's what the British people want. We've watched them, haven't we? Since Margaret Thatcher, we've watched them slowly but surely destroying British industry where they can. We're now watching them slowly but surely making sure that the British steel industry, which, in parenthesis, as it were, we need in order to manufacture armaments should it be necessary in the future. They're trying to ensure that these businesses or this business fails. Then, in due course, if we vote to stay in, we become a satellite of Brussels. That's all we are. We're under German control and the cartel which controls them. And along comes Obama, I think it was I know it was Gore Vidal who said that every man who becomes American president has been bought as much as 10 times over before he gets the job. And we all know who's doing the buying. We know the big families in America who were Nazi sympathisers, incidentally. We know who they are. Now, are you going to label me a crank because I can see that? I can see it's obvious. We're not going to give up the pound. So we're always going to be on the periphery of Europe. And, as far as I'm concerned, if we tell the British people the truth, then there's no way they'll want to stay anywhere near the damn thing. They'll want to leave. And I, therefore, am suggesting that British people ask themselves this question. Do they really believe that we are going to give up the pound, accept the flow of immigrants into this country willy-nilly without any control whatsoever, ad infinitum, until we are unrecognisable as Great Britain? This is no disrespect to the people who are coming. They're coming to find a better life for themselves. Of course they are. We would do the same thing in their situation. But do they honestly believe that's what the British people want? That we want to be prepared to simply take a back seat while everybody else, the world is run by third parties who are not subject to the ballot box. Now, I've listened, as I said, I've listened today, I've listened to all the claptrap from Osborne, and now Obama suggesting that we really should be in Europe. If America were presented with the same circumstances, they would not touch it with a barge pole. And everybody knows that. And the only reason that Obama is saying what he's saying is that he is in thrall to the same cartel that the rest of Europe is. I'll rephrase that. That America is, and Europe is. Now, I don't want to be labelled a crank. Nobody does. But I'm not. There's enough, if you study it, and I've been studying it for a long time, there's enough evidence out there to suggest that everything that's happening now has nothing to do with the welfare of the British people. We should become simply a few sub-regions of Europe with no identity at all, and our votes will mean nothing. Now tell me, the British people want that, do they? Just because you're trying to frighten them, or they are trying to frighten them, into believing that, well, we'll lose all the jobs, we're subject to, we're small, we're little. It's all nonsense. And it's easy to do. The man in the street is going to be frightened for his life. And there's nothing to be frightened of. The world is waiting for us to take the lead and get out of this damn organisation, to fend for ourselves, to redirect ourselves to trading with the British Commonwealth, America and any other country in the world. There are 40-odd countries in Europe, not just the 28 who are part of this union. You've only got to sit and watch the proceedings in the Parliament, or our Parliament if it comes to that, to know that we're being sold a pup, or the attempts being made to do so. And bringing Obama over here to try to do it, and listen to Osborne spouting what our situation will be in, 14 or 15 years from now. He doesn't know what it'll be next Wednesday, and he doesn't even know what it was last Wednesday. The man should have been sacked ages ago. All he's doing is carrying out the orders of his master. And his master is the same master as Cameron has and Obama has. And if that labels me a crank, then I'm a crank. But you can take it from me. I'm not sitting here quietly while the prospect of my grandchildren becoming slaves of some bloody corporate European entity takes its unfettered course. I'm not going to. And I'll tell you something else. If somebody tries to tell me that I've got to obey European regulations, well, they can think again. It's not going to happen. Now, wake up. Wake up, for God's sake, and stop. The BBC today, I was ready to throw up. Simpering women going on about Obama as if he was Jesus Christ himself. It's quite astonishing, the lengths that they'll go to. And I have no doubt in my mind, though nobody's going to quote me the statistics, half the political parties of the United Kingdom and other entities of one form or another, including Scottish Parliament, etc., etc., is being given money, hand over fist, by our money, incidentally, by Europe or EU in Brussels, in order to get them to vote as they want. Do it once and you're doomed. Think about it. There's nothing to fear here. This country has enough ingenuity and ability. It's proven it 100 times to get out in the world and trade and run its organisations effectively and efficiently. It's not doing it now. It won't, will it? It won't, because it has no need to. These people are angling for positions within the European establishment, where they'll no longer be subject to the ballot box, and where they're, as I once put it, they'll be on a nice little number until they retire in the sun. We've seen it. We've seen it with a number of British people already. Think about it. Think about it. We've seen how these people behave, and the fact that they're all sitting on the same fence, when there's no logic in giving up and saying it doesn't matter what happens to Britain. What truly British person is going to suggest, admit, and take the view in any way, shape or form that we can't do what we choose to do? We can. Indeed, our industry will be reborn if we get away from this damned organisation. We were led up the gum tree, we were lied to in order to take us into it, we were lied to in order to keep us in it, and they're lying like hell now to try to keep us there. Now wake up. This has got to stop. The referendum has to get rid of this damned European Union. Then we can settle down to properly dealing and collaborating with the people, the countries of Europe, the sovereign nations of Europe. And if we don't want to do that, if we're happy to go along with the alternative, then we'll all be spending euros as soon as they can make it. We'll be accepting people into this country wherever they come from, whenever the European Union chooses to put them here. And they'll put people here, and they'll make sure people come here who will assist them in controlling the British people, lock, stock and barrel. I can't say any more. If that's what you want, well, I don't know. You deserve it. Thank you.